When we think of the Great Pyramids of Giza, towering over the desert with an almost supernatural presence, we often imagine them being raised by enslaved laborers forced to toil under a blazing sun. But modern archaeology tells a very different story, one that brings us closer to the daily lives of the workers who achieved this breathtaking feat. For these were not nameless slaves dragged in chains, but skilled laborers, farmers, and craftsmen, many of whom rotated their time between agricultural work and pyramid construction, creating what was essentially one of the earliest large-scale organized labor forces in human history, and their lives were filled with routines, challenges, and a strong sense of purpose. So to understand how these workers lived, we must first place them within the landscape of the Old Kingdom, a time when Egypt was flourishing under the centralized rule of powerful pharaohs like Khufu, who commissioned the Great Pyramid. And in this golden age, the construction of pyramids was not only a massive architectural project, but also a religious and political act, designed to demonstrate the divine authority of the pharaoh and secure his place in the afterlife. And the workers who built these structures were part of that vision, their daily labor contributing not only to the glory of Egypt, but also to their own sense of belonging in a society that valued collective achievement. And the workers themselves lived in organized communities, with entire villages built to house them close to the construction site. And archaeological excavations on the Giza Plateau have uncovered evidence of these settlements, revealing streets of mud brick houses, bakeries, breweries, storage rooms, and even administrative offices, suggesting that life here was structured, efficient, and surprisingly comfortable compared to the harsh stereotype of slaves working to exhaustion. And within these villages, thousands of workers lived in rotating groups, or crews, with some staying for months at a time before returning to their farms along the Nile, where they would tend to their crops when the flooding season ended. And this system ensured a steady supply of labor, while also creating a sense of shared duty, as workers from different regions of Egypt contributed to the building of their king's eternal monument. And beyond the housing itself, the diet of these pyramid builders was robust, designed to fuel long days of physical effort, for archaeological finds reveal vast quantities of bread, beer, onions, garlic, and dried fish, staples of the Egyptian diet, but also cattle bones, sheep, and goats, suggesting that workers were provided with meat on a regular basis, a luxury not always common in daily Egyptian households. And this indicates that the workers were not treated as expendable labor, but as a valued workforce whose health and strength were crucial to the project's success. And while their meals gave them energy, the social structure of the work crews gave them identity. For graffiti found inside the Great Pyramid itself contains the names of worker gangs, such as the Friends of Khufu, showing that workers took pride in their roles, often competing in friendly rivalry with other groups. And this pride in their work, combined with the relatively good living conditions, demonstrates that the pyramid was built not simply by force, but by organization, community, and shared purpose. And yet, life was not without its challenges, as injuries were common, from broken bones to strained muscles. And archaeological evidence shows that many workers were buried in special cemeteries near the pyramids, a mark of respect that further suggests they were honored for their service. And these burials often contained modest goods, tokens of everyday life that allow us to glimpse the humanity of those who built these wonders, reminding us that behind the stone blocks and massive architecture were individuals with families, routines, and dreams. And so, when we picture the daily life of Egyptian workers, we must imagine not only the sweat and toil of labor, but also the hum of a bustling village, the smell of bread baking in communal ovens, the chatter of men sharing beer at the end of a long day, and the quiet pride of knowing that their work would outlast them, standing as a symbol of eternity in the desert. A life far more complex and meaningful than the myths of chains and whips would have us believe. The organization of pyramid construction was unlike anything the world had seen before, a massive logistical achievement that required discipline, leadership, and coordination on a scale that rivals modern industrial projects, and to make it all work, the Egyptians developed a structured hierarchy where every worker had a place and every task was carefully assigned, beginning with the crews, groups of about 2,000 men, divided further into smaller units, each with its own leaders and responsibilities, and these crews functioned almost like military regiments, with names that reflected pride and loyalty, such as the Drunkards of Menkaura or the Friends of Khufu, suggesting not only a sense of humor but also a deep camaraderie among the men, and above them stood the overseers, men of higher social status who supervised the work, ensured that supplies were distributed, and maintained the pace of construction, while still answering to elite administrators who managed the project for the pharaoh himself, and these overseers often had scribes by their side, who meticulously recorded every detail, from the delivery of stone blocks to the number of loaves of bread distributed, creating a paper trail of bureaucracy that kept the workforce functioning smoothly, and this system of accountability ensured that resources were not wasted, and that workers were rewarded for their service, with rations of beer, bread, and sometimes meat carefully calculated for each man. And to modern eyes this may seem like simple sustenance, but in ancient Egypt, where most peasants survived on a very basic diet, these provisions were meaningful, turning service on the pyramids into a chance for stability and security. And this organizational brilliance extended to the work itself, for tasks were distributed according to skill, with quarrymen cutting limestone blocks, boatmen transporting them along the Nile, masons shaping the stone, and laborers hauling them into place, each link in the chain vital to the whole. And while the imagery of thousands of men dragging stones up massive ramps is familiar, what is less understood is the engineering precision with which these ramps were designed, adjusted, and dismantled. And though historians still debate the exact methods used, the evidence shows that Egyptians did not rely on brute force alone, but on careful planning, geometry, and teamwork. And within the crews, smaller groups often specialized in certain aspects of construction, with some focused on moving stone, others on setting it, and still others on finishing the surface, creating a rhythm of labor that kept the project moving forward day after day, year after year. And for the workers themselves, this structure provided a sense of identity and belonging, for they were not just faceless laborers but members of a unit, bound by rivalry and pride, their names and achievements sometimes immortalized in the graffiti they left behind, such as the gang of the Horus Megiddo, proudly scrawled inside Khufu's pyramid, and these little marks remind us that they were aware of their role in history, that they wanted to be remembered not as slaves but as builders, craftsmen, and men of purpose. And at the very top of the pyramid project stood the high officials and priests, who ensured that the work was not only efficient but also aligned with religious tradition, for building a pyramid was as much a sacred duty as a political statement, and priests often conducted rituals at key stages, blessing the work and invoking divine protection over the laborers, reminding them that their toil was part of something eternal. And when we examine this system as a whole, we see not chaos but order, not cruelty but a remarkable balance of labor, reward, and respect. A system that motivated men to give their best, knowing they were not only serving their pharaoh but also participating in the greatest architectural achievement of their age. And in this way, the organization of pyramid labor was as much about human psychology as it was about stone and tools, turning an impossible dream into a living reality, one block, one team, and one day at a time. A typical day in the life of a pyramid worker began long before the desert sun rose over the Giza plateau. For these men, organized into rotating shifts, awoke in their mud-brick barracks to the sound of overseers calling crews together, and though their lives were filled with demanding labor, routine was steady, almost rhythmic, and in many ways provided more structure and sustenance than the seasonal uncertainty of farming. For after washing at communal basins and breaking their fast with bread and beer, staples of the Egyptian diet, they would gather in their teams, waiting for assignments that had been carefully prepared by scribes and overseers, who tracked every detail of the project with reed pens on papyrus scrolls. And once the orders were given, the work began, with some crews heading to the nearby quarries where limestone blocks were cut with copper chisels, dolerite pounding stones, and sheer perseverance, while others focused on transporting the heavy blocks across sledges, lubricating the sand with water to ease the drag, a technique proven by modern experiments, and still others climbed the ramps that snaked their way up the pyramid's growing sides, maneuvering blocks into place with ropes, levers, and coordinated shouts. And this work was not random chaos but carefully orchestrated labor, with each man knowing his role, whether it was hauling, guiding, chiseling, or positioning, and throughout the day the crews worked in cycles, pausing for meals of bread, dried fish, onions, and occasionally meat, which provided both energy and a sense of reward. And though the desert sun was punishing, archaeological evidence suggests that workers were rotated and breaks were built into the schedule, ensuring that the labor force could sustain itself for years without collapse. And in these pauses between work, the human side of life emerged as men shared stories, laughter, and camaraderie, competing in friendly rivalries between crews whose names and graffiti testify to their pride. And once the meal was over, the rhythm of labor resumed, with chants and songs often accompanying the pulling of sledges, keeping time and boosting morale. And as the sun began to fall toward the horizon, the day's labor drew to a close, with crews returning to their village, tired but not broken, gathering in communal spaces where beer was shared, bread was baked, and conversations filled the air. And here we see that their lives were not only about toil but also about community. For excavations of worker villages reveal evidence of bakeries, breweries, workshops, and even modest medical care, with bones showing signs of healed injuries, suggesting that injured workers were tended to and allowed to recover, rather than being discarded. And this level of care paints a picture of a workforce that, while certainly enduring hardship, was valued and supported. And so in the evening, as stars began to emerge over the desert sky, men rested in their simple houses, their bellies full, their bodies aching, but their spirits bound by the knowledge that they were building something eternal, a monument that linked them not only to their pharaoh but to the gods themselves. And while to us their lives may seem harsh, for many of these workers, pyramid duty may have provided more food, structure, and purpose than life back in their home villages, reminding us that the rhythm of their day was not only about labor, but about belonging, pride, and the timeless drive of humanity to create something greater than themselves. The living conditions of the workers who built the pyramids reveal a world far more complex and humane than the old myths of whips and chains. For excavations at the Giza plateau have uncovered entire villages constructed to house and sustain these men, complete with streets of mud brick houses, communal bakeries, breweries, and storage facilities, evidence of an organized system designed to care for a workforce numbering in the thousands. And while the houses themselves were simple, often 1 or 2 rooms with low ceilings and mud brick walls, they provided shelter from the scorching sun and the cool desert nights, creating a community where workers could rest, eat, and recover from long days of labor. And central to this life was food. For archaeologists have found animal bones, charred grain, and storage jars in great quantities, suggesting that workers were well fed with a diet far better than the subsistence meals common in rural villages. And this diet included bread, beer, onions, garlic, fish, and most remarkably, meat from cattle, sheep, and goats, a sign that the state-insured pyramid builders had the strength needed for their monumental tasks. And it is estimated that thousands of animals were slaughtered each year to feed the crews, creating one of the earliest examples of large-scale supply chains in history, with herds driven from across Egypt to the work camps, and beer, far from being a luxury, was a staple, brewed in vast vats and distributed in measured rations, providing both hydration and nutrition. For the alcohol content killed bacteria in the water, and the grain base gave workers extra energy. And beyond food, evidence suggests that medical care was available, for skeletons unearthed in nearby cemeteries show signs of healed fractures and treated injuries, meaning that workers were not simply left to die if hurt but were cared for, possibly by trained healers employed by the state, and this care extended to burial. For the cemeteries near the workers' village contain graves of men who labored on the pyramids, buried with modest goods such as pottery, tools, or personal items, a striking contrast to the burials of slaves in other cultures. And this suggests that these workers were respected for their role in Egypt's greatest building projects, their contribution honored even in death, and daily life in the village likely included more than just work and rest. For with bakeries, breweries, and workshops scattered throughout, there was social interaction, music, and storytelling, creating a sense of belonging that bound the crews together. And inscriptions found on walls reveal not only administrative notes but graffiti, playful markings that hint at humor and pride, showing that these men were not faceless laborers but individuals with personalities, rivalries, and friendships. And while most workers were men, evidence suggests that families may have lived nearby, as pottery fragments and domestic items hint at the presence of women and children in peripheral areas, suggesting that pyramid construction was not an isolated male endeavor but part of a larger community life that surrounded the monumental project. And so, far from being an image of suffering and despair, the worker village at Giza reveals a society that valued its labor force, feeding them, housing them, caring for their injuries, and even honoring them in burial. And this challenges our modern assumptions, reminding us that the pyramids were not the product of cruelty alone, but of a society that invested in its people, knowing that only through organization, respect, and shared purpose could such wonders be built. And in this way, the daily life of workers at Giza reflects a story of resilience, community, and dignity, showing us that even those whose names are largely forgotten played a crucial role in creating a monument that continues to astonish the world thousands of years later. The construction of the pyramids has fascinated historians and engineers for centuries, and at the heart of this enduring mystery lies the question of how Egyptian workers, with no iron tools, no wheels for heavy transport, and no modern machinery, managed to raise structures that remain among the largest and most precise ever built. And the answer, though still debated, can be pieced together through archaeology, experimentation, and ancient records, revealing a story of ingenuity, patience, and sheer human determination. For the workers relied on an array of simple yet highly effective tools, such as copper chisels, stone hammers, wooden sledges, and ropes made from papyrus or palm fibers, and while copper is soft compared to modern metals, it was sharpened frequently, allowing workers to carve limestone with surprising precision, and for the harder granite used in chambers and sarcophagi, pounding stones made of dolerite were employed, a slow but effective method of breaking and shaping massive blocks. And when it came to transporting these blocks, weighing anywhere from 2 to 80 tons, workers used wooden sledges dragged over prepared paths, and modern experiments have shown that pouring water over the sand in front of the sledges reduced friction by nearly half, meaning fewer men were needed to pull each stone, and ramps, both straight and zigzagging, likely played a crucial role in raising blocks to higher levels, though scholars continue to debate whether a single massive ramp or a combination of smaller ramps was used. And evidence of post holes and embankments near the pyramid sites supports the idea of temporary construction works built and dismantled as the structure rose. And beyond moving the blocks, the precision of placement remains astonishing, with joints between stones so tight that even a razor blade cannot pass through, achieved by skilled stonecutters who carefully smoothed and adjusted surfaces, sometimes using red ochre marks as guides for alignment, and to lift blocks into their final positions, teams may have used levers, gradually raising stones step by step until they fit perfectly, and while such techniques required immense labor, they also required organization, for each stage of construction demanded hundreds of men working in unison, guided by overseers who coordinated tasks with remarkable efficiency. And the layout of the Great Pyramid, aligned almost perfectly to the cardinal points of the compass, suggests not only engineering genius but astronomical knowledge, for surveyors used the stars, likely the circumpolar constellations, to set the base with extraordinary accuracy, and this marriage of science and labor shows that pyramid building was not a random effort, but the result of planned, methodical execution over decades, and modern tests, from computer simulations to full-scale experiments, have confirmed that such techniques were indeed possible with Bronze Age technology, debunking the need for alien intervention or lost civilizations, and instead celebrating the resourcefulness of human beings working together for a shared goal. And yet, while the techniques were simple, the scale was anything but, requiring millions of days of labor, constant sharpening of tools, replenishment of materials, and ceaseless coordination, making pyramid construction not only a feat of engineering but also of logistics, supply management, and workforce organization, all achieved in a world without machines, engines, or electricity. And this reality underscores the brilliance of the Egyptians, who turned humble tools and simple physics into the foundation of one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, a monument so enduring that it continues to inspire awe and wonder more than 500 years later, a testament to the idea that with determination, cooperation, and ingenuity, humanity can accomplish what once seemed impossible. The building of the pyramids was not simply a matter of brute force, but of remarkable social organization. For the thousands of men involved were divided into teams, squads, and units that functioned like a vast machine, each part performing a specific task that contributed to the larger whole. And evidence from ancient graffiti carved into stones and blocks reveals that these groups even had names such as the Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of Menkaure, showing that crews took pride in their work and developed identities within the larger project. And at the base of this system were the quarrymen, men who cut and prepared the limestone blocks in quarries located just beside the Giza plateau, their chisels and dolerite pounding stones ringing day and night as they shaped rough blocks into workable forms, and alongside them were the haulers, teams that dragged the stones on sledges along prepared paths, chanting in rhythm to keep their steps aligned, while water carriers ensured the sand was dampened to reduce friction, making the journey to the construction site smoother. And as the stones approached the pyramid, masons and stonecutters refined their surfaces, shaving away imperfections until the blocks could slot together with breathtaking precision. And when the time came to place them, lever teams worked in synchronization, inching the massive weights upward until they slid perfectly into their designated spots, all while overseers directed traffic, ensuring that the pace remained steady and that no time was wasted. And higher up the hierarchy were scribes, men trained in reading and writing who kept meticulous records of supplies, workforce shifts, and progress reports, ensuring that food, beer, tools, and materials flowed without interruption. And without these scribes, the massive logistical challenge of feeding and housing thousands of laborers would have collapsed, for the pyramid was not just stone and sweat, but also administration, numbers, and planning, and above the scribes and overseers were higher-ranking officials, men appointed by the pharaoh himself, who ensured that the king's vision was executed with fidelity. And these officials lived in larger houses near the workers' village, enjoyed finer food, and wielded authority, their presence a reminder that the pyramid was not just a building project but a political and religious mission of national importance. And within this structure, specialization flourished, for evidence suggests that some men became expert rope makers, while others were skilled carpenters who fashioned sledges, rollers, and wooden tools, and still others managed the bakeries and breweries that produced the steady stream of bread and beer that fueled the workforce. And together this intricate system ensured that the pyramid rose stone by stone, year after year, and yet within this hierarchy there was camaraderie, for graffiti left behind by workers not only boasted of team achievements but sometimes poked fun at rivals, revealing a human side to this immense endeavor, one where pride, humor, and competition drove men to give their best, and this organization reflects the genius of ancient Egypt, not only in engineering but in social management, for it transformed a daunting project into an achievable one by dividing labor, delegating responsibility, and creating a structure that mirrored the broader society of Egypt itself, where every man, from the lowly holler to the high-ranking overseer, had a role in fulfilling the pharaoh's divine mission, and in this way, the construction of the pyramids was as much a triumph of social cohesion as it was of physical might. A story not of slaves dragged to their deaths but of organized communities working in unison toward a goal that would define their civilization for millennia. For the men who built the pyramids, the work was not only a matter of survival or duty but also deeply rooted in faith. For in ancient Egypt, religion was woven into every aspect of life, and pyramid building represented the ultimate service to the gods and to the divine ruler who was seen as the living embodiment of Horus on earth, and in death as Osiris, lord of the afterlife. And for these workers, carving stone, hauling blocks, and raising monuments was more than labor. It was an act of devotion, a contribution to cosmic balance, or mat, the principle of harmony that governed the universe. And the pyramids themselves were not just tombs but stairways to the heavens, designed to carry the soul of the king into the afterlife where he would join the eternal stars, ensuring prosperity for the land. And this belief gave meaning to the sweat and toil of every man on site. For by helping the pharaoh ascend to eternity, they believed they too were securing blessings for themselves, their families, and all of Egypt. And rituals were central to this process, for priests performed ceremonies on the plateau, offering libations, burning incense, and chanting prayers to consecrate the work, while workers may have carried amulets or charms of protective deities like Bes or Taweret, hoping to shield themselves from accidents and misfortune. And evidence of small shrines and figurines near workers' camps suggests that even ordinary laborers found comfort in invoking the gods. Before setting out each day and beyond protection, religion offered motivation. For to work on the pyramid of the pharaoh was to gain merit in the eyes of the divine order. And though their names might not be carved into stone, their hands were part of a project that touched eternity. And in this way, the pyramid was a symbol of collective salvation, not only for the king but for the entire nation. And this collective faith is evident in the artistic symbols carved into stones, where some crews painted marks that invoked gods of strength or victory, aligning their work with divine power. And the celestial alignment of the pyramid itself, oriented almost perfectly to true north, reinforced the idea that this monument connected earth to sky, humanity to eternity, and workers were aware of this symbolism. For they lived in a culture where myth and daily life were inseparable, and songs, chants, and stories passed through the camps would have reinforced the idea that they were serving a divine mission. And this belief helped sustain morale during long years of labor, for religion gave meaning to hardship, and the prospect of the afterlife was never far from their minds. Cemeteries near the workers' village reveal that those who labored on the pyramid were buried with care, supplied with modest grave goods that reflected the Egyptian belief that life continued beyond death. And by aligning themselves with the pharaoh's eternal journey, these workers hoped to share in his divine protection, ensuring that their own souls would not be forgotten. And in this sense, pyramid building was not just the construction of stone but a spiritual collaboration, a shared faith project in which sweat, sacrifice, and belief came together to create something far larger than themselves. And this combination of religious devotion and cultural pride explains why, despite the enormous hardships, men returned season after season to continue the work, finding strength in the conviction that they were part of a story written in the heavens, a story that still endures today. As the Great Pyramids rise above the desert, silent witnesses to a faith-driven civilization that believed no human effort was too great when eternity was the reward. The story of pyramid building is not complete without acknowledging the immense challenges and dangers faced by the workers. For while the romantic image of faith and purpose gave meaning to their labor, the daily reality was one of relentless physical strain, risks of injury, and exposure to unforgiving conditions, for the Giza Plateau offered little shelter from the blazing sun, where summer heat baked the desert to unbearable levels and winter nights brought biting cold. And under these extremes men toiled from dawn until dusk, hauling stone, pounding rock, and enduring the monotony of endless repetitive tasks, and accidents were an unavoidable reality for moving ton blocks with ropes, sledges, and ramps meant the constant risk of crushed limbs, broken bones, or even fatal mishaps, and skeletal remains discovered in nearby cemeteries bear silent witness to these hardships, with fractures, spinal wear, and joint damage common among men who spent years of their lives in backbreaking labor. Yet the remarkable part of this story lies not only in the injuries but in the evidence of healing, for many bones show signs of mending, suggesting that injured workers were treated and cared for by their community, allowed to recover and return to their lives, a rare sign of compassion in the ancient world. And beyond accidents, exhaustion itself was a daily enemy, for even with ample food supplies and beer rations, the ceaseless pace of labor wore down body and spirits, and so the work was organized into rotating shifts, with men serving for part of the year before returning to their villages, a system that spread the burden across Egypt while ensuring that the pyramid always had fresh labor. But disease, too, lurked within the workers' camps. Cramped quarters and constant exposure to dust, heat, and smoke from ovens created fertile ground for infections, respiratory issues, and stomach illnesses, and yet despite these conditions, workers endured, driven not only by duty but also by the knowledge that their families at home depended on the state provisions and wages earned through their service, and the psychological challenge was equally great. For the sheer size of the pyramid meant years, even decades, of relentless work with no immediate reward, and morale could falter. Yet graffiti and inscriptions suggest that humor, competition between teams, and pride in progress helped to keep spirits alive, reminding us that these were men with resilience as well as strength, and the challenges extended beyond the workers themselves, for overseers had to constantly balance safety with productivity, ensuring that the project continued while minimizing loss of life, a delicate task in an age without modern equipment, and every stone hauled, every ramp raised, every tool forged carried risks that could never fully be eliminated. And so the pyramid stands not only as a monument to Egyptian engineering, but also as a silent memorial to the countless struggles, injuries, and hardships endured by those who made it possible, their sacrifices etched invisibly into every block, their perseverance embodied in the structure that still towers above the desert sands, reminding us that great achievements are never born without great cost, and that behind the smooth limestone face of history's most famous monument lies a story of human endurance, danger, and triumph over conditions that might have broken lesser men. The legacy of the workers who built the pyramids stretches far beyond the stones they raised, for while the pharaohs claimed the glory and their names are carved into history, it was the sweat, skill, and endurance of ordinary men that made such grandeur possible. And though their identities are largely lost to time, their impact on Egyptian civilization is undeniable, for the pyramids became not only tombs but symbols of national unity, monuments that declared Egypt's wealth, stability, and divine order to the world, and in this way, every worker contributed to the shaping of an identity that endured for thousands of years, Yet the legacy is not only cultural but also technological. For the techniques refined at Giza, stone quarrying, large-scale transport, precision placement, laid the foundation for later temples, obelisks, and colossal statues that would define the landscape of Egypt, and this tradition of monumental building became one of the hallmarks of the civilization, inspiring awe in neighbors and rivals alike. And even today, the pyramid form echoes across cultures, from Mesoamerican temples to modern architecture, proving that the influence of these early builders extended far beyond their own desert plateau. And yet what makes their story resonate most strongly is the human element, for their lives remind us that history is not only written by kings and generals, but also by the hands of countless unnamed individuals whose labor shaped the world. And to recognize their role is to honor a universal truth, that great civilizations rise not only from vision but from collective effort, and modern archaeology has helped bring their story back to life, uncovering workers' villages, bakeries, breweries, and cemeteries that give us glimpses into their daily struggles and triumphs, reminding us that behind the grandeur of the pyramids were men who laughed, loved, suffered, and persevered. And in this sense, their legacy is deeply relatable to us today, for their pursuit of purpose, their resilience in the face of hardship, and their contribution to something larger than themselves mirrors the human experience across time. And perhaps this is why the pyramids continue to fascinate not only as marvels of engineering, but as monuments to human will. And as visitors from around the globe stand before them, gazing upward in awe, they are not only witnessing the vision of a pharaoh, but also the labor of farmers, artisans, and builders whose collective effort made the impossible real. And in honoring their story, we see that the true legacy of the pyramid is not just its size or endurance, but the reminder that human beings, united in purpose, can achieve wonders that outlast empires, and though the names of these workers may never be known, their legacy endures in every stone still standing after 400-500 years, whispering to us that greatness is built not only by rulers but by the many who toil unseen, their efforts echoing across eternity.